Launching the greatest military invasion in the history of warfare took over 2 years of immense planning and preparation for the June 6, 1944 invasion of Europe. The 50 miles of coastline in western Normandy was chosen. This area was within range of fighter planes from English bases. In reality, the invasion began with the 8th Air Force in the summer of 1943, bombing German aircraft factories, airfields, along with their supporting factories, plus railways and bridges. By June of 1943, there were over 1.5 million U.S. troops in England preparing for the invasion, plus 4,100 ships, crafts of all types, which included major units of the U.S. and British navies, along with stockpile of supplies and equipment of over 2.5 million tons. Due to the terrain of the beaches, with a high water mark at 18 feet to a stretch of open sand up to 300 yards wide at low tide, and with bluffs reaching heights from 100 to 170 feet, advancement was very slow. Needless to say, the critical factor of successful beachheads along the coast was the ability to supply fresh troops and supplies rapidly enough to reject any enemy counterattack and still stay on the offensive. The fate of the whole invasion depended upon this. Casualties were both heavy and light, with some companies losing 60 to 80% of their officers and men, plus their supplies. Normandy beaches, the site of D-Day, had various gun emplacements covering the beaches with small arms, machine guns, mortars, and heavy artillery. The beaches were heavily secured with all kinds of explosives, landmines, TNT buried under rocks set off by tripwires, also mines attached to concertina tripwire. From this badly destroyed building, the enemy had good crossfire with all kinds of weapons. Among most of the beaches were structures approximately 5.5 feet high, made of 3 or more reinforced steel frames crossed at the center. Some mines were also attached to these structures. These structures, not being visible at high tide, were designed to rupture the bottoms of boats. The beach also had fortifications in the water, razor-sharp wire strung from the beach up to the cliff. All through France, the U.S. 9th Army eventually reaches the Rhine River. While giving the troops a well-deserved rest, they reorganized their divisions before going on the offensive. The troops waited on the shore of the Rhine River for the heavy bombing by the 8th Air Force, along with 8,000 rounds of artillery fire per minute lasting for 1 hour before loading on the ferry and crossing the river to Essen. Complete destruction of Essen, Germany, due to Allied bombing is obvious from this aerial view. Also in Essen, every structure of the famed Krupp munitions works was in total ruin due to the bombing by the 8th Air Force. With infantrymen advancing on Essen after heavy fighting close to the Rhine River shore, the Germans soon retreated and the city was under the 9th Army control. Moving through the newly captured city, the 964th Field Artillery Battalion searches for new objectives. Tanks and infantrymen of the 79th Division move into position on the outskirts of Mulheim. Waiting for more troops and supplies, infantrymen watch as reinforcements approach from across the river. As reconnaissance troops and tanks moved forward in Mulheim, the 9th Army moved up the main street in the suburb. Critical observation of the terrain ahead before moving on toward the Rhine-Herne Canal was essential for the advanced scouts of the 315th Regiment. It's an all-out assault for the 9th Army troops crossing the Rhine-Herne Canal in boats before footbridges or pontoon bridges could be erected by the engineers. Then it moved to split the huge German pocket in the Ruhr Valley. The objective was to separate the German army for a more efficient battle. Due to heavy artillery and machine gun fire, urgency was the rule for the 315th Infantrymen to hurry across the dike in the drive for the Ruhr pocket. Advanced troops met heavy resistance by the German army on their way to the Ruhr Valley. Moving down the dike to use the footbridge just completed by the engineers on the Rhine-Herne Canal, the frontline troops had fast and efficient reinforcements and supplies. Arriving on the other side of the river, the troops stayed in between the ropes, which indicated an area cleared of landmines. This footbridge giving way slowed troop advancements dramatically until it could be repaired. On their way to the Ruhr Valley, the troops passed civilians removing clothing and food from their homes. The war deprived German civilians of many everyday necessities, such as these women removing water from a bomb crater. In order to make necessary changes, forward artillery spotters are checking for hits on the outskirts of Gladbeck. Some of the many German prisoners captured by U.S. troops on the outskirts of New Essen are en route to a POW camp. Medics of the 79th Division evacuated the wounded in any efficient and quick means available. This wounded infantryman was evacuated by medics of the 79th Division and transported to a field hospital in an LST on the Rhine River. Many factories and cities were devastated by Allied bombing. Among some of the factories besides the Krupp Works destroyed was the oil refinery in Sturgrade, Germany. After bombings, fires are very common, as in this oil byproduct plant near Waddick. This benzene plant in Bottrop, the largest airplane fuel manufacturing plant in Germany, was destroyed by aerial bombardment despite the camouflage netting. 88mm artillery and ammunition was manufactured in this Bochum-Verein steelworks in Bochum, Germany. The steel mill in Dinslaken was heavily damaged. In their lab is where they tested the strength of the German helmet. In Havelhofer, Germany, this small factory manufactured experimental self-propelled radio-controlled FX-3 rockets. These rockets were captured before they were finished. The inventor was captured and taken to England along with some completed rockets. Near Walsum, U.S. troops captured the front end of a submarine under construction at the Rhein-Wehren-Walsum yard. Camouflage netting covering this large synthetic rubber plant in Hulst, Germany, hid the structure from aerial bombers, making them almost impossible to see. The bombers missed a huge potential target, leaving the plant completely intact when it was seized. Operating in full production with 4,500 slave laborers and 5,500 German workers, the plant produced as much as 4,000 pounds of raw rubber per month. After being seized, the plant was kept in operation manufacturing rubber for Allied use. This laboratory was where German chemists performed quality assurance tests. These concrete enclosures covering each machine in the power plant provided added protection from bombings. A rubber solution is processed manufacturing rubber in this Buna band fabricating machine. The rail yards in Sturgray, Germany, after devastating attacks by Allied bombers, were covered with twisted rails, wrecked freight cars, locomotives, and numerous bomb craters. Troops move across a newly constructed treadway bridge under heavy smoke cover before it was completed by the engineers. The engineers repaired the blown Einsch Canal Bridge in Marlow, Germany for our use as the first tanks and infantry move across the canal on their way to Marlow. Not being able to use the demolished overpass on the Reich Autobahn near Gladbeck, MPs directed traffic under the rubble. This 500-pound dud bomb had to be removed by the 304th Combat Engineers for access across the damaged bridge. Bridges being rebuilt by U.S. engineers were essential for U.S. Army vehicles crossing bodies of water. The Germans blew up this Moss River Bridge to slow down U.S. troops. Many cities were completely destroyed. U.S. infantrymen, hearing a tank coming toward them and knowing no Allied tanks were in the area, take cover. They watched as he slowed down, stopped his tank, and jumped out to observe the surrounding terrain. The lost tank commander was captured along with his crew. Getting tanks across the Moss River was quite an undertaking as they backed on to an LSM. When loaded, a bulldozer had to push the LSM into the river. French labor conscripts held by the Germans at Mulheim and freed by the 79th Division were happy to see American tanks with troops passing by. In an attempt to get the Germans to evacuate the city of Duisburg, eliminating needless bloodshed by civilians, men of the 79th Division crossed the Ruhr River under a white flag to confer with the Burgermeister of Duisburg. Looking over the map of the area to be evacuated, the negotiation went through. The next challenge was looking for and taking out snipers. A machine gunner gives cover to the infantrymen of the 79th Division before they run for new cover as they mop up snipers. Near Dortmund, an anti-aircraft locating device is used with 88mm artillery weapons. These 9th Army troops are advancing to Overbruch and are searching for new objectives. Tanks move into the newly captured Overbruch just after it was taken by the infantry regiment of the 79th Division. After 5 days of frontline fighting, these airborne infantrymen take a much-deserved break. C Battery Field Artillery Battalion prepares to load their 300,000th shell to be fired since D-Day +8. While engineers clear the way, landmines hold up 9th Army tanks of the 717th TK Battalion near Dinslagen. Tanks and infantrymen wait for the signal to move on to Dinslagen as a tank commander of the 717th Battalion observes open terrain before advancing. After fighting their way through a wooden area, infantrymen emerge into an open field on their way to Dinslagen. U.S. tank destroyers take up position under a shattered tree on the outskirts of Dinslagen in preparation for combat. Troops of the 79th Division move on to new objectives after capturing and mopping up in Dinslagen. After engaging in combat with the 79th Division column of tanks and infantrymen, this German plane was shot down on its 3rd strafing line. With sewers stopped up from the rubble and heavy rain, the roads flooded in Gladbach. Liberated by the 9th Army, former German slave laborers, men and women, lived together in shabby buildings surrounded by barbed wire fences and well guarded. Russian laborers burned their filth and rubbish that accumulated during their imprisonment. Dead from malnutrition and lack of medical care, a funeral procession of Russian slave laborers accompanied the body of one of their members. The casket was removed from the wagon and lowered into the grave. A Russian youth shovels dirt to fill the grave. When the 79th Army troops captured Dortmund, 4,100 prisoners and slave laborers of 13 nationalities were liberated. American soldiers found POWs and slave laborers afflicted with malnutrition, starvation, TB, beriberi, head wounds, and fractured bones, too weak to move. Dozens were found lying in manure piles, ditches, and cellars, dying from neglect and lack of medical treatment. "50 bodies, unburied and decomposing, were found in the yard of the German barracks, now used as a hospital. These people were cared for at the Displaced Persons Center in Dortmund under the command of Captain William T. Drake from Wilmington, Ohio. Russian doctors and Russian women assisted U.S. medics of the 79th Army in caring for the sick. CIA officers checked decomposed bodies of dead American soldiers for identification. After the war was over in Europe, some troops were sent to Marseille, France, for a 46-day trip to the Pacific Theater to take part in the invasion of Japan. General Tomoyuki Yamashita and his men were holed up in the hills of Manila after being badly defeated in both the Leyte and Luzon campaigns. But after the Americans dropped the A-bombs, the war was over in the Pacific. They were there when they received word that the Japanese forces surrendered on August 14, 1945. The general surrendered his men and himself to the American military. Filipinos and GIs entered the war-ruined residence of the Philippine High Commission in Manila, the chosen location for the arraignment of General Yamashita. Watching and waiting for the outcome of General Yamashita's arraignment, 400 spectators and correspondents crowd into this room. Arriving at the residence for the first step in the war crimes, the general was delivered in an ambulance for security reasons. Prison officer Major Kenworthy of the military police delivered the general to the arraignment. General Yamashita conferred with his interpreter before entering the building. No guns were allowed before entering the prison cell where the general was being held. Even American officers handed over their weapons and ammunition before entering the prison. Japanese soldiers faithfully stood by his side, awaiting the arraignment before the War Crimes Commission. The general seemed to enjoy his leisure time and cigarettes while waiting for his arraignment to begin. The Japanese army officers spent some time reading while waiting. During a break, the general spent some time with his chief of staff. The War Crime Commission, being sworn in, starts the process. The general conferring with his defense counsel during his arraignment. Pleading not guilty at his arraignment before the War Crimes Commission, the general needed his personal interpreter. An American interpreter was present along with the general's defense counsel, who was a well-known American attorney. Japanese General Tomoyuki Yamashita ordered the baton death march of American Filipino prisoners of war. 70,000 POWs were captured by the Japanese in the Philippines in the early stages of World War II on April 9, 1942. They were forced to march 55 miles, with many dying along the way. For his war crimes and atrocities in the Philippines, he was tried and found guilty. He was hanged in Manila on February 23, 1946.